In the words of Amanda Brugel, it was weird as shit. Those were my exact thoughts on Drag Race Italia Season 1, which I recently finished for my Drag Race podcast, which covers every single season in order, including the international seasons. This quaint little season was a fever dream from start to finish, featuring 2 non-elimination episodes, 1 double elimination, crowning a winner with 0 wins and 4 mini-challenge wins, eliminating a queen for being vulgar and blasphemous, having one of the most disruptive snatch games of all time, creating unnecessary cue cards for transitional scenes, and simultaneously was oddly iconic. This season clocks in at just 6 episodes. And all of that happened. Yup, you heard that right, 6 episodes. Up until this point, the only other season to clock in at that few episodes is All Stars 1. And according to Latrice Royale in All Stars Season 4, we aren't allowed to talk about All Stars 1. So its legality as a season is up for interpretation at best, and questionable at worst. While Italia 1 was something that happened, I do admire how firmly it held space for alternative queens. Alternative is a word used here to describe something that is traditionally more masculine in nature, that was presented by Avant-Garde as well as Lukeisha Lubamba. It held so much space, in fact, for these contestants that it accidentally harmed some really incredible queens, like Ivana Vamp, who was the first to go home, but represented iconography of drag queens of the past, as well as the absolute slay that was Divinity. Now, Drag Race Italia does exist in a sector of the world where being gay still warrants an eyebrow raise, and drag is certainly seen as just as taboo. The producers of the show wanted to make sure that drag was perceived as safe, accessible, and family-friendly, to the point where it berates Avant-Garde and Norma Jean for breaking that harmonious vibe they were going for, as well as not being good role models to the LGBTQIA+ community. And they do make sure to say LGBTQIA+ every time they bring it up. All because these two decided to drop around some F-bombs, all during Untucked. An outburst, I should note here, that could have easily been cut out of the final edit, and it could have easily been not focused on. So who are the real monsters here? Is it them? Or the editors for leaving that in? But I do gotta say, Norma's outburst of shouting, "You producers, you put me, a 46-year-old, here on the set with all of these idiots," may have been one of the most iconic outbursts in probably any season of all time. But we are just getting started, folks. So grab your chips, grab your popcorn, grab your Sour Patch Kids, because we are about to go on a cinematic journey through an absolute unit of a time capsule of Drag Race history. And I just know that the 4 people who watch Drag Race Italia are sitting in their seats living right now. But for the rest of you who never got to experience this gem of a season, you're in for a real treat. You might not want that treat, but you're gonna get it. Drag Race Italia Season 1 introduces us to our 3 new judges: Priscilla, Tommaso, and Chiara. Now, I have been informed that the internet calls Priscilla Mother Brick. And you know what, I gotta be honest, I don't think her makeup is that bad. Certainly not any worse than Fred's in Holland 1, or RuPaul's in Season 17. Although, Miss Priscilla did like to flex that she had a passport because that head was always on a journey. Every time she spoke, she had a case of the Trixie doing RuPaul, but as a bobblehead. Tommaso is one of the cutest little guys that I have ever seen on Drag Race ever. Brad Goreski grew on me as a snack as the seasons went on. Big Javi took a few episodes to discover his inner thoughty thought and allow that to come to the outside thoughty thought. Carlo Bozard was a DILF from day one, but Tommaso was just a cute little guy. And the way he talked with his front teeth made me want to accidentally drop a pencil in front of him and just go, "Oh no." Chiara is an interesting reality TV character because she carries so much authority with her in her presence on the set. She's the Michelle character, the Stacey McKenzie, the Tracy Melchor, the Anna Locking. You get it. But unlike Michelle and a lot of these other divas, she doesn't have the mother thing quite on lock. She's quite demure, sweet. She's almost like someone's cool friend who brings a flask to the party and spikes the punch because she knows that the sauce is gonna be weak. And that diva loves a headpiece that does not want to stay on her head. The authority in most Drag Race seasons typically falls on the main host. Rue, Supreme, Pangina, and Art, Fred. The authority falls on them to take care of most of the show's direction. They'll sometimes delegate their fruit fly or the guy of the day to go and do something in the workroom and maybe narrate something on the set, but at the end of the day, they're pretty much the ones that are taking care of it from start to finish. Canada's Drag Race was the first season to deviate from this format so heavily. Likely because it was the very first non-Rue hosted season that was directly related to the franchise. Yes, Drag Race Thailand had existed before that, but the Kantana group and Pangina and Art were doing things so differently that Drag Race Thailand almost feels like its own entity. And while Rue may have been involved in the finales, it seemed like Drag Race proper was sort of hands-off with Thailand, where they were a little more directly hands-on with Canada's Drag Race, even sending Michelle up there to judge the ball episode. And Drag Race Thailand was so removed from the cinematic universe of RuPaul's Drag Race that I give it a pass for being so different because the format was more top model than anything. I mean, they took the format and shattered it, where Canada's Drag Race was following the rubric. So back to Brooke, who really needed to establish her presence as a mainline judge, and as an authority figure after being someone who had just competed on a season a couple of months before. The show likely didn't want to step on RuPaul's toes while Brooke was finding her footing, so the authority was equally distributed to then judges Stacey McKenzie and Jeffrey Boyer Chapman. They both were there, with the guest judge of the week narrating the runway as well as doing the cover girl walk. A horrid mistake, if I may add. Brooke walked so that Fred could stumble, so that Supreme could stand back up and keep walking, so that Priscilla could wobble and shake her head a bit. So let's fly back over to Italia from Canada. The Drag Race Italia authority is all but changed from the original format. Unlike Canada's Drag Race, which seems to distribute power equally between all three judges, even down to the deliberation and the secret head nod to decide who's going home, Drag Race Italia almost falls back on Project Runway top model deep lore. Tommaso and Chiara are the Tim Gunn, the Miss J, the J. Alexanders of this season. They dole out the mini challenge and distribute wins. They announce the main challenge and what that's going to entail. They guide the contestants on how they should proceed with the runway. And then they all but disappear when Priscilla's in drag. Yes, they are in fact there on the panel, but their authority is so diminished that they take a huge backseat to Priscilla in those moments where during the bulk of the challenges, they are the front authority. They are the front figure. Much like Tyra and Heidi, Priscilla is there to dish out the final blow and have the ultimate final say in who's in the top and who's in the bottom. I found this format change to be quite refreshing as someone who loves both Top Model and Project Runway, just for the reality beasts that they are. And knowing that Drag Race was initially intended to be a parody of both of these competition reality shows, I'm delighted by this choice to follow almost verbatim what those projects were doing. The episode format is fairly standard. Quirky design challenge to open the series after a chaotic photo shoot, complete with a pit crew member who did make me believe that God was real. An infomercial challenge with a iconic Divas runway. A Rusical challenge. The most chaotic Snatch Game episode probably of all time, but not because of the contestants, but because of the way they chose to format it. And also not hosted by the host, but hosted by Tommaso, a classic makeover challenge, as well as a RuPaul finale song cover. In its haste to get through the season, this season does sacrifice a ball challenge, a cringy acting challenge with bad writing, girl groups, and a proper branding challenge. But you know what? I didn't want to see those anyway. Again, I want to hold space for this season and its ability to retain its own culture while being deep in the shadow of the Drag Race machine. UK1 and Down Under 1 lose a lot of their cultural relevance because of Rue and Michelle's presence there, because they quite frankly are not from the area, and so their plugged-inness to that culture is limited. And even with themed runway categories like Queen of Your Hometown and Finest Sheila in the Bush, the cultural nuance is absolutely lost upon these two and upon the greater part of the show. Even when they know what the tea is, the other judges have to compensate their knowledge for the two in the room who don't get it. Drag Race Holland 1 was basically a copy pasta of mainline season 3, 5, and 8, and lacked pretty much all cultural identity. Canada 1 did a few and a boot jokes throughout its season, but for the most part didn't really embrace Canadian culture until season 2. So even though España 1 embraced its culture immediately and quickly, retaining that from the jump to the finale, I wasn't so sure that Italia 1 would be able to live up to high expectations that España had set for me, because the non-mainline seasons up until this point had been pandering towards Rue, had been pandering towards mainline drag fans, and were not embracing the cultural nuance that made that season special and different and unique to the rest of the world. Because if we're going to have an international season, we need to see the cultural relevance represented there. It's made for those people, not for international audiences. And yet, up until this point, a lot of those seasons seem to be made for international fans rather than people who lived there. And I was worried that Italia 1 was going to pander to mainline drag fans as well. But I was pleasantly surprised that it didn't. Italia season 1 starts with a gondola photo shoot challenge. And I just want to remember that pit crew member again. And they're challenged with ugly boxes to create Italian-style looks. Made with garbage junk from their boxes, Italia spends its entire rusical celebrating an Italian diva, even from the mini challenge and the runway, and holds tight to its Italianness all season, rather than try to just make this a mainline copy pasta bloated season. While I hold space for that end of production, what I do not hold space for is the show's dedication and overcommitment to inconsistent judging, suspicious judgment, and the punishing and eliminating of queens, and rewarding queens who weren't necessarily doing the strongest in the competition. Larish and Farida Kant are the two main players of this season, and the show goes out of its way sometimes to establish these two as kind of the only divas in the room, despite queens like Electra Bionic and Divinity really slaying the competition and challenges, making their mark every time they could, showing their well-rounded drag, but being almost completely off the radar of the judging panel as well as production, until it was basically the end of their storylines. Divinity unjustly lands in the bottom during the Snatch Game and is given the boot, after delivering what is quite literally the strongest 80s look of that entire night. And Electra is called safe during 3 challenges that she easily could have won, all in production trade for Larish and Farida Khan. And I'm not saying that either one of them were bad, but Electra was doing so good. In my opinion, she was the Italian Carmen Farala, without the fierce sewing skills. She was charismatic and charming, polished and gritty at the same time, showcasing her unique brand week after week after week, and being not only empathetic, but also well-spoken during moments of drama, chaos, and turmoil in the competition. In week 1, nobody goes home because the world needs drag now more than ever. And this is kind of where this trend started up. In week 2, Ivana Vamp is eliminated, which, in my opinion, was super unfair because that advertising challenge was a phlegmy, Pepsi-induced belch of a challenge. It was so inconsistent in the way that it was created and distributed, as well as edited and produced. In week 2, no one is eliminated once again, for reasons that are still unknown to me, and it's here where the big bomb of the season goes off. Priscilla says that Avant-Garde looks like a truck driver, which is a very rude way of saying that she looked like the first brick thrown at Stonewall, specifically in those challenges. To which Ava takes umbrage that truck drivers were disrespected. In this moment where her drag was invalidated, she was more offended that truck drivers would be offended by that comparison, and shouts how narrow-minded the critique was, which it was. And I do agree with her. Drag can be anything, and it doesn't have to be this narrow, feminine thing. And if Priscilla wasn't happy with Ava's look, there were plenty of other ways that she could have addressed that, or tell her to embrace her femininity, rather than to refer to her as a truck driver in drag. And Norma is just that girl that you cannot take drinking, because she takes a singular sip of her 80% Momo, 20% Sa, and decides that she's ready to fight a service worker. Because for some reason, she gets hot out of nowhere after her second sip of cocktail, and starts on this rampage about how others in the competition are relying on nothing and how hard she's working. Literally out of nowhere and on unprompted, untriggered even. And this event lasts several minutes as she rapid fires insults across the room, shouting obscenities until she eventually walks out of the room, where she continues to shout obscenities at the producers, at the crew, as well as the contestants. Meanwhile, Ava, who is still recovering from the third-degree burn of being told on national television that she looks like a messy man by someone who would later be referred to as Mother Brick, is steamed like broccoli, unsure why Enorma is popping off, when she had a real problem she was upset by. And the show could have easily edited all of this out to not focus on it, but it chose to leave it in so that it could make an example of these two queens. Episode 4 proceeds as if nothing had happened. Except for the extended cut of the fight and a speech typed up by a typewriter about how this experience was against the show's values and how it doesn't represent queer people, even though all of that could have been cut and this exposition could have been left out. The Snatch Game happens, and this could have been one of the best Snatch Games of all time based on how it was formatted, as well as how the questions were presented. But the show brings in this random guest who kept interrupting the contestants with fawn eyes and blocky eyebrows, and ruined the entire thing. Then proceeds to the runway, right as Electro Bionic is starting to smack her bubblicious gum that she's going to present during her runway. Enorma and Ava are ripped out of the lineup to come to the main stage, where they are then berated by the judges for like a solid 8 minutes that we saw, embarrassing the LGBTQIA plus community of Italy nationally and globally. They're told that they were disruptive, disrespectful, and blasphemous, and that they didn't represent the culture or their community as good examples or role models. But when have drag queens ever been that? Drag queens are not supposed to be that. That's very Mickey Mouse Club sanitized BS that I'm not a fan of. But again, I'm holding space that this is Italy and things are a little bit different there. I recognize that the world is not in shades of gray in other parts, that sometimes it is black and white. And some regions of the world are more deeply conservative than my safe little corner of Southern California. And those places have to preserve the sanctity of language, respect, and TV presence than in other places. I see that, I respect that, and I politely disagree. Again, from my safe little corner of Southern California, it's my personal belief that if something is a problem for television and should not be seen because it's a bad example, it should have been cut and unaired. Maybe barely alluded to, and then left on the editing floor to die. Instead, they chose to make an example of these two. These two very clearly traumatized human beings, and who were clearly marginalized in their own communities. Enorma was very open about her HIV status and her relationship with her family and how tumultuous that all was. And Ava was quite open about how her avant-garde and alternative style to drag wasn't always accepted by people. And so I don't think these two were the ones to behavior police. I think it easily could have been handled in private, and the explosion respected as something awkward and uncomfortable that happened, without drawing too much attention to it, and without embarrassing these two on national TV. There are so many moments that happen even in mainline Drag Race that get cut to preserve the characters of some of these contestants that go on the show and not try to assassinate their character. Anyways, after Enorma and Ava are verbally tossed around like a Caesar salad, they're made to lip sync for punishment to RuPaul's champion of all songs. Keep in mind that Electro Bionic is still backstage smacking on that gum, so it was paper probably by the time that she got on the runway. Enorma is then eliminated, and Ava is apologized to for being referred to as a truck driver. Priscilla even mentions that she called her truck driver friends and asked if they were offended, and they said they weren't, so this apology felt hollow and lifeless. So I don't know. Felt like saving face to me. Ava is then punished yet again for her poor performance in the runway and in the Snatch Game by being made to lip sync a second time in one episode. This time for the Real Coconuts. And they dropped her in a lip sync with Divinity, who was not on the radar of producers at all. And as I mentioned earlier, had one of the best 80s looks of the entire night. Divinity was most certainly not on the radar of production, but she had an almost Scarlett Bobo-esque run about her. She had that raw confidence and charisma, having this strength that emanated from her but never quite being connected with. But unfortunately, the show was grasping at straws to retain Larish and Lakeisha Lubamba, and Divinity was the only player I think they were willing to sacrifice in order to retain those two characters. So, off Divinity goes, and Ava proceeds for one more episode. The following week is the makeover week, and you've undoubtedly seen the iconic vampire blood-spilling runway that is one of the best, if not the best, makeovers of all time, purely because of its runway presentation. This moment unequivocally altered my brain chemistry for the positive. It was like when Sasha revealed those rose petals. I was pretty sure that my girl Elektra was cooked to death during this moment, but the following week she takes the whole thing out of nowhere. Because she worked her entire pussy out during that challenge, as she had been doing all season. And in the end, Elektra had not one, but 0 main challenge wins. She had 4 mini challenge wins, and a ton of Astrolabe jewelry, and a mug that could end wars, cut diamonds, make grown men cry if they looked at it too long, like the Creation of Adam mural. And that is the very quick summary of what happened in Drag Race Italia 1. Some highlight standout moments for me were every time that Elektra stepped out on the main stage. She just radiates this gorgeous energy that makes me want her to step on me. And that absolute slay of Adita Von Teese runway, Divinity's 80s look, a Norma being a chaotic ball of energy who was disturbing and agitating the room at every single moment, Ava's overcommitment to this turn-of-the-century housewife drag, Lakeisha's drag being street from someone who's a homebody, hip-hop from someone who doesn't have rhythm, masculine and feminine from someone who's never seen a man or a woman. You get the point. And my last big highlight was Tommaso being the cutest thing since butterfly clips in the 90s. But some of the lows were the odd lip-sync choices. Songs that were oddly dated sounding, the downright strange judgment overall in the season, the stage lighting which could cause epileptic seizures if you looked too hard. And I didn't even mention the way that Priscilla calls girls safe and sends them to Untucked, because that was weird as too. In episode 1 through 4, the safe girls are announced immediately as the runway is over. And just as they're about to get to the end of the stage, Priscilla tells the remaining 4 that there are 2 tops and 2 bottoms. Obviously. And then dismisses them to Untucked as well. They're not even given critiques between Untucked. It is literally, you all are safe, go ahead. The rest of you are the tops and the bottoms. You can also leave. The safe girls are barely getting off the stage as the other girls are following them to go to Untucked as well. This season was an acid trip from beginning to end. I lived for how odd and different it all was. And I'm glad that it wasn't just another bloat season like Holland 1 was, but I was confused-fied by the choices and decisions made along the way, not only in production, but also in deliberation, as well as execution of the show. I liked all of the pieces, but maybe they were arranged by someone who had shaky hands, so they couldn't quite put them together correctly. I'm hoping that season 2 was better than 1. And that they nailed down what they were doing into a smoother format, because the structure of this program I think is solid. But it was an hour and 18 minutes of bright lights, cue cards, and very little actual storyline for the contestants. Much like Thailand 3's production, I don't know much if anything about these queens. I know some of them are hot, I know some of them are really cool in drag, but I don't know anything about them. How do you have a show that's an hour and 18 minutes and your cast has almost no storyline? The one who did give you storyline got the boot midway through. I know that Lakeisha is a silly mess, and I know that Elektra Bionic could spit on people as she walked by them while on the streets, and that people should be thankful for that, but is that anything substantial? Anyways, I am off to go perceive UK versus the World Season 1 and cry and be upset through the entire thing, because that is the next season that we are reviewing on our Drag Race podcast. And I would rather be dead than watch that. But if you have not had a chance to perceive Italia 1, you are missing out on a truly delicious and chaotic treat. If you did watch this, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. And if you would like a deeper review and overview of this season, check out that Drag Race podcast under That Sounds Gay, or you could check out the links that are below. And if you are not already a member of Extravaganza Extra, you can click that join button right next to that subscribe button. Members get early viewing of videos as well as schedule updates for things that I'm working on. And it's a way to support the channel. If you're not subscribed, hit that button. And I will see y'all on the flip.